What's up? Hope everyone's having a good day and is ready for another video. So today we got what if you should do a non-reverse or a reverse in discus. And I'm mainly doing this video for discus. I'm not going to do this for shot put because I believe every rotational shot putter should be a reverser. Glider, you can do either or, it doesn't really matter honestly. But I mean, perfectly a reverse. But it's more common to see a non-reverse in glide and still throw far compared to rotational shot. But for discus, people have thrown far with both. Now today we got to one of the best non-reversers in Robert Harding and one of the best reversers in Good Cantor. Alright, so today we're going to go over the pros and cons of the non-reverse and the reverse in discus, why people do them, and also the what type of attributes and body type usually do non-reverse and reverse. And then we'll just go into details of what makes a good non-reverse compared to a good reverse. Alright, so first, we'll go over the pros and cons. So, we'll start with the reverse. So, the pros. So, the pros of a non-reverse is 1, it's a little easier to do. 2, it's a little more consistent because you don't leave the ground and you have less moving parts. And when you have less moving parts, you're going to tend to be more consistent because it's easier to perform. All right? So that's why gliders on average are generally more consistent than reversers and shot put. Because there's a lot less things to go wrong. Or why like a really old computer can last a long time compared to like a brand new computer or something like that. I'm not really good with technology, so as you can probably see by the edits in my videos or lack thereof. But number 2 is more consistent. Number 3, you can get a lot more out on the discus, and what I mean by out is you can get a lot more into the discus without the worry of fouling. And the 4th reason is you can hold a block a lot longer and you can stay grounded a lot longer because you don't leave the ground really. So theoretically, if you're a really good non-reverser, you have the potential to throw really, really far a lot easier than with a reverse. A little easier. All right. So those are the pros. The cons. 1, you won't get the same height on the discus. So the fly time usually won't be as high or as long as a reverser. Another con is that to throw really far with it, you have to be a lot more athletic than a non-reverser. You generally have to have longer arms than a non-reverser, and than a reverser. You have to be a lot more flexible and mobile with a non-reverse. And another con is that generally you have to be pretty tall and pretty technically sound to throw a non-reverse really far. Because you do hold a block a lot longer than a reverse, you have to be a lot more patient on the finish. You have to work the ground a lot better than normally you would with a reverse. So those are just things to keep in mind. But if you can do all those things and you do fit all these attributes, you can throw really, really far with a reverse. There have been a thrower that's thrown 71 meters. Robert Harding in this video is throwing 70. There's been a lot of 70 meter or like really, really far discus throwers that have thrown a non-reverse. So don't think you can't. But on average, a reverser will probably throw further than a non-reverser just because it's much more common to find a good, like a lot more people can do a reverse than a lot of people and be good at it than a lot of people do a non-reverse and be good at it. All right. So the reason why people do reverses is 1, you don't have to be a freak of nature to actually throw far with a reverse. Because you can get more out and height and use a little more upward leg drive. In a reverse, you can get a lot more power. And also, you don't have to be as technically sound because you can rely a lot more on momentum and not have to work the ground as long to throw just as far as a good non-reverser. And you just can get away with a lot more stuff going wrong in a reverse than a non-reverse. So that's really it. And generally, you can throw further with a reverse when you're shorter than if you were going to be a non-reverser. So generally, you see really good non-reversers be around like 6'7" plus in terms of height, like 6'7". Or generally, like I've seen like good reversers be like 6 foot and still throw 70 meters. So, I mean, there's a clear difference there. You know, Gerd Cantor here. I chose him because he's pretty evenly proportioned. Now, granted, he's 6'5", so I mean he's not like short, but in terms of his limb lengths, he's not like overly proportioned in terms of his arms and stuff. Like he's pretty evenly proportioned for someone who's 6'5". Whereas Robert Harding has these monkey arms that are like 7 feet long, and he's 6'7", 6'8", and just an absolute freak of nature. Not to say Gerd Cantor isn't either, because, you know, he is. But a lot more people can be built like Gerd Cantor than Robert Harding. And I'm just using Gerd Cantor just because later in this video he has, he has a non-reverse, which I also want to go over. The difference between a reverser doing a non-reverse in practice compared to a true non-reverse. Because I think that's a common misconception. Because I believe that a reverser doing a non-reverse in practice should look a little different than a true non-reverse, because they do different things at the finish. So we're not going to go over all of these, like the whole throw. We're just going to go over the finish, because I've actually already done videos on these two. So let's go to where their left feet touch down. All right. So right here, the left feet touch down here. Oh, right there. Stop. Oh my God. Grant, he's a little blocked off here, but I think his left foot touches down there. All right, so right here, right off the bat, you can clearly see a difference right away in the way that they're finishing. All right, and just the way they're landing. So Robert Harding's a little lower in the legs and has the discus a little further back. I know it seems like Gerd Cantor has the disc a little further back, but if you see the stretch and how far the discus is behind his hip, behind Robert Harding's hip compared to Gerd Cantor, because the discus for Gerd is somewhere like around here. You know, like there's just a lot more tension in this compared to Gerd Cantor. And again, you do want a lot of tension, but you don't want as much as a non-reverse. And I'll get into that in a second. All right. So right here, he stays and he keeps both knees really bent. And if you notice with Robert Harding's right knee, it kind of goes down. So he rotates down and his left leg is really bent. All right? So, this is a common misconception and why people can't throw far with a non-reverse. And if you see any good non-reverser like Lars Riedel, Jürgen Scholl, Robert Harding, you know, just to name a few, they all finish with a bent left knee. All right, and the reason why is because if they were to extend their left knee, they would just do a reverse, because that's how you leave the ground. Think about it. If you don't bend your knees when you jump, you're not going to really leave the ground. The extension of the knees is what makes you leave the ground in a jump. It's the same kind of principles in a reverse, even though you shouldn't you shouldn't jump when you reverse. But if you look at Gerd Cantor, you see how his left knee fully extends and he's off the ground and Gerd Cantor works a little more up. So he's here and he works a little more up. Sorry for this. This is a very slow motion video. Yeah, he works, you can see it. He works a lot more up and around compared to Robert Harding, who works down and around. All right, because the non-reverse, you have to stay grounded. All right, to throw far, and with that bent knee, left knee. Now you want to be careful too, because you notice how he's bending it, but it's still blocking him, and it's still like he still stays over his right side and works over his right side, so he's not shifting forward as much. All right, so that's another common misconception. All right, so you see Gert Cantor leaves the ground right here. Now I believe Gert Cantor probably has the best reverse ever, and it's a very repeatable reverse. It's either him, Daniel Stahl, or Wolfgang Schmidt, probably, or Virgilius Alekna. But I just chose Gert Cantor because he just happened to, in this video, he just happened to have a non-reverse throw as well, so I could compare them. Granted, it's a side view, but yeah, so there's the differences there. All right, and what makes a good non-reverse compared to reverse. So let's fast forward to this. Of course, this is really slow motion, blah, blah, blah. So 1, he lands here. All right. Now, on average, okay, it kind of cuts off on his finish. On average, most non-reversers, and actually this is a pretty technical non-reverse, so he's not trying to go for distance here, because, you know, he's in a clinic. Most non-reverse throws I've seen of Gert Cantor and most reversers, they kind of fall out the front, and there's a big reason for that. It's because they're not doing a true non-reverse. They usually extend their knee, their left knee, to practice for a reverse. All right. And then the reason they do non-reverse is, 1, it's just good to do because it shows you patience on the finish. It teaches you how to work the ground. It teaches you to stay over your right leg if you're a right-handed thrower in the middle. Oops. It just teaches you a lot of good things. But if you notice the difference here, this leg is way more extended. It's still a little bent, but a lot more extended than Robert Harding's. And he's not, let me go back. He's a lot wider in his feet, and he's also not nearly as bent in this right knee, so he's working a lot more up. All right, so he's here, and then he works really far through. Oh, also the non-reverse teaches you how to hold a good block too. So I still feel that reversers, if you're a reverser, you should still do non-reverses, because, you know, if you're a good reverser, you really just you want to think of the reverse as a non-reverse, except you just keep rotating. So you just get that more height and more out compared to a non-reverse. So the reason why the reverse happens is because you have to stay in. Otherwise, you just fall out of the ring, as most reversers do when they do a non-reverse. You know, Daniel Stahl, Ishan Adadi, you know, like so many, Peter Malachowski. I mean, almost any good reverser, when they do non-reversers, they don't necessarily fall out the front. You know, you see a lot more shot putters too when they do non-reverses. They rarely ever stay in the ring unless they're doing like actual like technical throws, like Gert Cantor is here, where like they just stick the finish and they don't really do like an out. But that's for like a different, that they're just trying to like feel themselves stay grounded and work the right and stay on the right side a long time. And also, like, if you're not trying to throw very far, you know, you're just not gonna have that out, you know, because that out comes from energy, from the back of the ring and the middle, you know, and all that. But whatever, we're not going to talk about that in this video. But you're here, so he's here, boom. And you see the difference here between these positions. So he's a lot more out. He's angled a lot more up compared to Robert Harding. All right. So, oops, I'm moving the wrong one. All right. So there are some clear differences. So the reason, I don't think I actually finished my thought. So the reason why reversers on average tend to foul non-reverse throws in practice and stuff is because, 1, they don't need to stay in the ring. All right. Because they're not going to do it in comp, so they don't have to practice that. The reason why you have this bent knee and you work down in a true non-reverse thrower is to stay in the ring. Because if this right knee was not as bent and he didn't, if you notice, so he's here, he drags the foot. This is basically him stopping his momentum and stopping him from fouling. All right, and you see this a lot with non-reversers. They'll drag their foot, kind of like a jab thrower. After they release and they kind of drag their right foot, to slow them down, to stop them from fouling out the front. Same kind of thing, here. Or here, like Gerd Cantor just comes and then he just kind of just steps, Like, he's not, like, trying to stay in the ring. He just kind of does because he's a beast and, he's one of the best throwers ever. So he's very technically sound. But there are almost any other video of Gerd Cantor, he's not staying in the ring in a non-reverse. And if you don't believe me, just Google it. Just type in, YouTube it or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, if you just look, I mean, he rarely ever actually saves throws in practice. He's actually notorious, just like Joe Kovacs, at fouling out the front. But also, when you're at that kind of level and you've been doing it for so many years, you know how to save a throw. And, like, they don't really care, like, you know how to save a throw. And generally, if you do a throw correctly and you have a good throw, you're going to stay in, I always say, if you do a reverse correctly, you're going to stay in the ring, Just look at, like, Ryan Krauser. Ryan Krauser probably has the best reverse ever and the best finish ever for a shot putter. When's the last time you saw him foot foul a throw? That he didn't do on purpose because he threw like 22-20 and, he's just like, oh, that was terrible. And he just walked out the front. You rarely ever see him actually foul a throw, like, due to, like, technical issues. All right? So that's something to keep in mind, too. So if you're fouling out the front, and I mean, like falling out the front, like, you're just, like, barely in it, then there's some technical issues, and that's where a non-reverse comes in. That means you're just not staying over your right leg long enough, and you're not working the ground long enough, and you might be too upper body dominant. So with a non-reverse, you can't get away with a lot of technical errors, and that's why still reversers use a lot of non-reverse throws. All right, because it teaches you to be technically sound. Because if you're not, you're not going to throw very far with it, and your release will be off, and you'll probably pull off it, so it teaches you how to have good fundamentals. All right, so that's something to keep in mind too, because I know it's very fun to reverse, but you want to reverse and throw far, so that's something to keep in mind. All right, but I think that covers it really. So, in summation, I guess I didn't really answer this. What makes a good non-reverser to reverser? So one, a non-reverser technically, a non-reverser on a good non-reverser, and what I mean, a non-reverser that does someone that does a non-reverse in competition. So not just practice, like an actual, like, true non-reverser, like a Robert Harding or Lars Riedel comes straight to mind. So what makes a good non-reverser? One, you're a lot more mobile. Two, you're a lot more athletic. Three, you're on average a lot taller. 4, you generally have a way bigger wingspan compared to your height. And 5, you're really technically sound and have one of the best blocks in the world. All right? So, well, I shouldn't say that, but have, like, a really solid block compared to a reverser. All right? What makes a good reverser? One, you still have to, like, to throw, like, 70 plus meters, you have to be a freak athlete anyway. Nobody isn't athletic and throws 70 meters. That's just, I've never seen that ever. Nobody ever has, because you just can't. There's levels to these bezels, as they say. But, so, on average, you don't have to be as athletic. Although to be good in anything, you still have to be. 2, you don't have to, you can be more like average height, and still throw reasonably far. Like, I've seen people who are like 5'6" that have thrown over 50 to like 60 meters, I've seen that. So, like, you can just get away with a lot more, and you can get a lot more height and out with a reverse. So, what makes a good reverser is, one, having good explosion. 2, having a good vertical jump. So you can produce a lot of force without bending your knees. So you have a lot more. So your ground reaction time is generally a lot better than a true non-reverser. Because you have to be. You have to move a lot faster than a non-reverser as well. 3, you generally don't have to be as mobile. Although to throw discus far, you do have to be pretty mobile, but not nearly as mobile as a non-reverser, a true non-reverser. And 3, honestly, everybody can. Let me put it this way: everyone can do a reverse and throw far, like reasonably far. Not everyone can do a true non-reverse and throw far. Like, not everyone can do a non-reverse and throw 70 meters. That takes a very specialized athlete. Okay? So, that's something to keep in mind. All right? But I will say, if you do get one of those athletes, I think it's better for them to do a non-reverse because, especially if they're competing for like a college or a high school, because on average, non-reversers are a lot more consistent than reversers. So if you're trying to like win medals and stuff, I would personally take consistency over someone who maybe threw for like twice. But also if you're a very good reverser, you will be consistent. So, but on average, you will, and that's why generally, Robert Harding, a 3-time world champ, Lars Riedel, 5-time world champ, they're consistent when it matters. So that's something to keep in mind. So, yeah. I think that about covers it. Let me know if you guys have any questions regarding the non-reverse and reverse and whether you should do it. I do think that everyone should do a non-reverse, at least in practice, in shot put and discus. Just because it's so important and so vital. Because if you just jump straight to reversing, you're going to end up just jumping. Especially if you don't have a coach who knows what they're doing. And especially if you don't know what you're doing. So everyone should start out with a non-reverse. All right. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And something to watch out for. Because, you don't want to jump at the finish. You still want to work the ground with a reverse. All right. So that's something to keep in mind. All right. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll probably make a video later about whether you should be a glider or a spinner and shot put. But other than that, see y'all later.